The Airport for Ugly People. A short story. A good-looking couple make a mistake. 3 security muppets in a small cubicle. Officer Intense, Officer Savage and Officer Belligerent. As soon as Cheryl and Tony walked into the Sir Warburton Drysdale International, they knew they'd made a mistake. Cheryl looked around immediately and said, "Oh shit, it's an airport for ugly people." Sure enough, ugliness and sundry malformations, aesthetic or clinical, were the order of the day. People lined up at the Family Mart to buy ugly pills. Cheryl and Tony felt conspicuous. There was CCTV. As they reached the first turnstile near check-in, they were stopped by a particularly horrid-looking woman in a dowdy uniform who told them there was an irregularity. Almost immediately the 3 Muppets appeared and marshalled them into the aforesaid cubicle in order to ascertain their motives. Their main concern in the first instance was Tony, who they regarded as a bit handsome. No, Tony insisted. "I'm not. Usually I'm ugly as sin. I'm just having a good hair day." "That's right," said Cheryl. "He can be really ugly. Just not today." As for Cheryl, one of the officers accused her of being slightly attractive. "She's not," Tony jumped in. "Not at all. You should get to know her. You should see her first thing in the morning." Cheryl thanked him for his support. Then the dragoons brought out the mirrors. Tony looked at himself and had to admit they were right. What a handsome devil. Cheryl, unable to help herself, looked at her face and had to straighten her bangs. It was the sort of insecurity only a slightly attractive woman displays. Having failed the mirror test, there would be paperwork. The Muppets were not impressed. Next, they instructed the good-looking couple to empty their bags onto the desk. Aha! A range of grooming and beauty products. Cheryl was carrying a collagen supplement. Her clothing, moreover, was scrupulously tasteful, and her underwear had strawberry cheesecake designs in alluring places. "We just want to catch our flight," Cheryl pleaded. "Not looking like that, you're not," said Officer Belligerent. "I told you," said Tony to Cheryl with some sudden bitterness. "Being beautiful will just get you into trouble." "Well, you're the one with the expensive Swiss-made moustache trimmer," Cheryl snapped back. In any case, the Muppets were not satisfied. A number of good-looking people had slipped through of recent times, and they were cracking down. They were going to make an example of these 2. Officer Intense was intense. "You think you can just walk in here in your neat casual attire and your tidy dentistry? How do you think all the ugly people feel?" He was pretty ugly himself. One of his eyes was having a disagreement with the other one, while his monobrow refereed. "It's a misunderstanding," said Tony. "She booked the tickets." He meant Cheryl. He was now throwing Cheryl under a bus. "Well, I didn't know it was an airport for ugly people," said Cheryl, defending herself. "It says nothing about that on the ticket." "No, but as everyone knew, Sir Warburton Drysdale had, in his day, looked like the Elephant Man's unfortunate brother, and had devoted his life to opening aviation to the aesthetically challenged. Cheryl was just showing insensitivity by claiming to be ignorant of these facts. Besides, when she booked the tickets, she might have noticed that all the in-flight food choices were either obesogenic or else bound to give you acne. Slim and appealing was not an option. Tony knew they should have paid the extra. It always pays to pay the extra. The reason it pays to pay the extra is because invariably the only way to buy into ugliness is to bribe the offending officials. It would cost much more than paying the extra in the first place. Had they paid the extra, they would have waltzed through the turnstiles like any regular ugly couple, and no one would have raised a grimace. Instead, "What is this?" asked the belligerent one, holding up a pair of Tony's faded denims. They were hidden at the bottom of his luggage. "Denim chic," the officer said, sneering. "Not in this airport, Charlie." His own mode of ugliness was structural. He resembled a bulldog. "Oh my God," said Cheryl, exasperated with her other half. "You didn't pack faded denim, did you?" "Damn it, Cheryl," spat Tony. "You packed your bikini." Bikini? The officers stopped in their tracks and looked at each other in earnest. Had they missed it? They sorted through Cheryl's underwear again, and this time found a tiny, tiny red two-pieced garment of revealing brevity that they immediately suspected of being bikini. One of them quickly jumped onto his walkie-talkie and called for reinforcements. Shortly after, another Muppet, only a Muppetess, entered the cubicle, Officer Misery Guts. She was an ill-shapen, rotund woman whose distinguishing feature was that her lipstick was lopsided. The situation needed no explanation to her. When she walked in, Officer Savage was holding up the exceedingly brief red two-piece, almost pieces of string and not much more, with his pencil. Misery Guts inspected it closely and gave her female confirmation. It was indeed a bikini. She turned to Cheryl, woman to woman, and asked, "How much did you pay for this?" By which she meant these two pathetic scraps of fabric barely capable of modest coverage on any but a flauntable figure. Cheryl hung her head in shame. $120, she confessed. On this admission, the female officer had every right to take Cheryl aside and inspect her for a Brazilian, but instead she perused the so-called garment carefully still more, a sort of morbid curiosity, and noted its red lustre. It was the approximate shade of the lipstick trailing alarmingly across one side of her mouth. How she had managed to get it so lopsided was unclear, but it was at least an effort to make herself presentable, if not alluring, Cheryl thought, even though it had gone sadly astray. It seemed she had a weakness for magenta. "Look, you can have it if you want it," Cheryl pleaded suddenly. "It was a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking." Only an indulgent, insensitive, highly nubile specimen of loveliness would pay $120 for two red pieces of string. For his part, Tony was unaware of the price tag. "You paid what?" he marvelled. Cheryl told him to shut his gob. Intense was intense again. "Did you really think you could just walk through here looking like $1 million with this sort of thing stashed in your bags? You must take us as fools." "I had no idea," pleaded Tony. "It was on her credit card." He insisted in any case that if he was indeed a bit handsome, as they asserted, then he had been born that way, and it was entirely beyond his control. "I neglect myself as much as the next man," he said. "Can I help it if I have handsome genetics?" The officers had heard that one before. The genetic defence. Sure, genes," said Savage, dismissive, himself living testimony to the shallow end of the gene pool. There was an asymmetry to his entire being, relieved only by excessive canines, that made him seem savage by nature, not just by name, every time he screwed up his face. He was especially concerned about the faded denim. How much had Tony squandered at some menswear boutique on an old pair of faded pants with designer holes in the knees? "You can have them," Tony decried. "Really? They make me look like Justin Timberlake." The more he spoke, the deeper he dug them into trouble. Cheryl took issue with the assertion that she looked like $1 million. Officer Belligerent accused her once more of being slightly attractive on purpose. "I look like this on a modest salary," she insisted. "Anyone can do it." This too was the wrong thing to say. Had it been true, why would there be any need for airports for ugly people in the first place? No. This couple were clutching at straws. The officers had heard these excuses before. They talked among themselves briefly, with the Muppetess holding up the bikini again and underlining the price. The other officers were obviously horrified at the implications, but tried to remain professional. They were discussing what action should be taken. Meanwhile, there were last calls for departing flights. "Look," said Tony, getting desperate and taking out his wallet. "Isn't there some way we can fix this? If there's a fine, I'd be happy to pay it now, on the spot." It was certainly heading that way. It was a well-worn pedestal of procedure. Dire waylays can be settled with quick cash. No further questions asked. It was unspoken. Everybody knew that Muppets are as poorly paid as they are poorly groomed, and their real agenda is to pocket the gorgeous tax. Officer Belligerent was about to say something belligerent again, but when Tony pulled out his wallet, he desisted and had a new aspect. The others were suddenly interested too. Officer Savage almost smiled, his canines on display under the fluoro lighting, as if to say, "At last we're getting somewhere." Muppet Misery's lipstick flinched. "Really," said Tony, now drawing out a few notes from the wallet, "we just want to catch our flight, so I'd be happy to pay for any infringement. If only they'd paid the extra in the first place." Intense latched onto the word infringement. "Yes," he said, "an infringement." Suddenly, everyone was on the same page. There was body language. Cheryl's body language said that it was all Tony's fault anyway, so it was only right that he should buy their way out of it. Belligerent took a seat and put his little bulldog hands upon the desk. He sighed. He found good-looking people tiresome. The terms of the infringement were thus about to be settled, and both Tony and Cheryl were resigned to the ugly injustice of it all, when unexpectedly another Muppet appeared at the entrance to the cubicle, an especially corpulent individual who looked like he'd worked at the Sir Warburton Drysdale for decades. It was Officer Slug. "Donut break," he announced forthrightly. He was holding a big tray of O-shaped, sugar-coated, deep-fried confections soaked in cholesterol, the ugly man's best friend. Muppet Misery Guts was suddenly chirpy. Likewise, her fellow officers were suddenly reprioritised. "Donut break," said Savage. And at this, all the Muppets left the cubicle and headed off to the staff room, leaving Tony and Cheryl sitting alone and awkward. There was a long silence. Being handsome and slightly attractive, respectively, how could they properly appreciate the pull of the donut upon the unnaturally hideous? A donut is an emotional event for ugly people. Our heroes looked at each other. Would the Muppetry be back soon? It seemed like no. "We can make the flight if we hurry," Cheryl said, leaping up and throwing her things back into her bag, tucking her overpriced bikini into her side pocket. "All right," said Tony, "but for God's sake, Cheryl, scruff yourself up or something." They could still make check-in and hightail it to the departure gate if they looked inconspicuously unkempt. "You're the one with the handsome jawline," Cheryl insisted. It was true. Leaving aside the rest of his face, itself well proportioned, he had a jawline like Liam Neeson. The least he could do, Cheryl was implying, is stay unshaved so as not to make a thing of it. Tony had no reply to that. They quickly reassembled their things and bolted. They could argue about it in flight. One thing was for sure. Next time they would double-check the tickets and pay the extra. Running up the escalator to the departure lounge, trying to seem as unappealing as possible, they went past a huge, tasteless mural depicting Sir Warburton Drysdale's regrettable features, one of nature's cruelties. He was gazing out at far horizons, fixed upon his dream of ugly aviation.